So by the time a baby is just 4 months old, long before they can even utter a single recognizable syllable, their brain is already secretly reading lips.
Yeah, which is incredible. I mean, at that stage, it is entirely biological pattern recognition. They are just silently taking in massive amounts of visual and auditory data,
Right.
watching the mechanical movements of mouths, and categorizing thousands of these little microsounds in their environment.
Which is just staggering to think about. And honestly, it's the perfect place for us to start today. So, welcome everyone to this custom tailored deep dive. We're taking a massive stack of notes, research, and literature reviews you shared with us, and we're tracing the ultimate journey of how humans make meaning.
It really is a journey.
It is. We are going to start down at that microscopic level, like we just said, how a baby's brain wires itself for language. And then from there, we'll explore the bizarre physical mechanics of how your eyes are actually reading right
The
now.
physical mechanics are wild, yeah.
Totally. And finally, we'll see how that exact same biological machinery eventually scales up into human culture, birthing epic poems, literary movements, and entire revolutions.
Because really, it's the ultimate magic trick of human evolution.
Right.
We go from babbling just to survive to uh, building entire civilizations out of syllables and metaphors.
Right.
And the through line connecting all of this is just our fundamental, desperate need to connect with one another.
Exactly. So whether you are a parent trying to decipher a toddler's babble, or maybe someone who loves a really dense philosophical novel, or you just want to know why we use the idioms we use, there is an aha moment waiting for you here in this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Let's jump back to those babies for a second. If a 4-month-old is already discriminating speech sounds, what happens when we throw multiple languages at them? Because the research highlights two completely different ways a brain handles bilingualism. You've got
Yes.
simultaneous and sequential.
Right. So simultaneous bilingualism is when a child is exposed to two languages at the exact same time. Usually this is before the age of 3. What is fascinating here is that initially the child might jumble the two together. Like they will borrow a word from language A to finish a sentence in language B.
Oh, sure, I've seen kids do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But by age 4, the brain performs this incredible sorting task. It just separates the two vocabularies completely. It's essentially building two parallel neurological tracks.
That is so cool. But sequential bilingualism is totally different, though, right? That's when you learn a second language later, but you use your first language as a tool to sort of unlock it.
Yeah, precisely.
Like, there is this incredible example from the sources of a student named Grace. So she grew up speaking English and Filipino fluently. Later on, she starts studying Spanish. And immediately, she recognizes the historical and phonetic overlaps between Spanish and Filipino.
Because of the colonial history, right?
Right. And she uses that existing framework to absorb the new language at a highly accelerated rate.
Because the first language acts as a catalyst. The cognitive framework for grammar, for syntax and vocabulary, it all already exists. So the brain just maps the new information onto the old structure.
It is like building a second house. It goes up way faster because you already know how to pour a foundation. You know how to frame a wall, run the plumbing. You're just applying the same blueprint to different materials.
That's a really good way to picture it.
Yeah.
But this whole construction process isn't just happening in a vacuum inside the brain. The Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky argued that this is a profoundly social act.
Vygotsky, right?
Yeah, he's foundational here.
Yeah.
He theorized that cognitive development requires social interaction. I mean, a child does not learn to speak by just listening to a radio broadcast in an empty room.
Right, they need interaction.
Exactly. They learn through dynamic reciprocal interaction. He introduced this concept called the zone of proximal development.
Oh, I love this concept.
It's great. So imagine a circle representing what a child can do entirely on their own. Now imagine a larger circle outside of that, representing what they can't do at all yet. The space between those two circles, that is the zone of proximal development. It is what the child can achieve, but only with guidance.
And the adult provides what he called scaffolding. Just like actual metal scaffolding on a building lets a worker reach a higher floor, a parent or teacher provides the social scaffolding, the prompts, the corrections, the interactive play that lets the child reach the next level of language.
Yeah, and without that scaffold, the building just doesn't go up.
Which actually brings up a tension I want to push back on a little bit based on the notes.
Okay, go for it.
We look at developmental red flags, like a baby making no sounds by, say, 6 months, or having less than 20 words combined across 2 languages by 20 months. And the literature points to environmental factors for this, things like inadequate stimulation or socioeconomic status. But if language is this deeply ingrained evolutionary human hardware, why is it so incredibly fragile to something like a family's economic struggles?
Well, that is really the core of the whole nature versus nurture dynamic. The hardware, the capacity for language is innate. We are born with it. But the software requires consistent, high-quality data input to actually boot up.
Ah, I see.
If a family is under severe economic stress, I mean, parents might be working multiple jobs. They might be exhausted.
Yeah.
They simply might not have the physical time or energy to provide that constant interactive scaffolding we just talked about.
Wow, yeah.
The biological drive to speak is robust, absolutely. But the actual acquisition process is fragile because it relies completely on the environment to feed it.
Okay, that clarifies it perfectly. So the brain eventually masters this highly social spoken language with all that scaffolding, but then it attempts this completely unnatural monumental leap. It tries to turn spoken sounds into abstract visual symbols on a piece of paper,
Yes.
which brings us to the actual physical mechanics of reading.
And unnatural is exactly the key word there. Evolution did not design us to read. We evolved to speak and listen.
Right.
To read, humanity essentially hijacked other parts of the brain, like our visual processing and fine motor control, and hotwired them together to decode text.
And the physical mechanics of this are just wild. I mean, think about what your eyes are doing right now as you listen to this, or what they do when you read a screen. We feel like our eyes are just smoothly gliding across a sentence.
But they aren't gliding at all.
No, they are making these violent, jerky little micro movements. They're called saccades. And between every single jump, your eyes come to a complete dead stop.
Right, which is called a fixation.
Exactly, just so the brain can process a word.
And if you fixate for too long or too often, your reading fluency drops significantly.
Makes sense.
And while your eyes are doing this weird mechanical dance, your vocal cords are often getting involved too, through something called subvocalization.
Wait, subvocalization.
Yeah, it's when you silently pronounce the words in your head, or maybe you even subtly move your lips while reading silently. It is literally a biological hangover from when we first learned to read out loud as children.
That's crazy. But wait, let me ask you about another mechanical habit mentioned in the source material. It's called regression.
Oh, yes.
This is when your eyes dart backward to look at a word you already read. It's often framed as a bad habit that slows readers down. But, I mean, if I am reading a really dense piece of philosophy, I jump back and reread the previous sentence all the time just to make sure I actually grasp the concept. Is that a bad physical habit?
No, actually, that is a fantastic distinction to make. What you are describing isn't a mechanical failure at all. It is high-level cognitive monitoring. In the literature, they call that metacognition.
Metacognition.
Right. Metacognition is simply thinking about your own thinking. It is the awareness of your own comprehension gaps. If your eyes bounce back simply out of nervous habit, sure, that is inefficient regression. But if your brain says, wait, I didn't fully understand that last paragraph, and purposefully directs your eyes back, that is metacognitive regression. You are actively repairing a break in meaning.
I love that, repairing a break in meaning. So what exactly is happening during those split-second fixations when we do capture meaning? How is the brain decoding those little ink squiggles?
So there are a few cognitive models for this. The first is the data-driven, or bottom-up model. This theory suggests you rely entirely on the visual data. You look at the letters, you sound out the syllables, combine them into words, and eventually you arrive at a concept. You are building meaning from the absolute bottom up.
It's like trying to put a jigsaw puzzle together by only looking at the shapes of the pieces without ever looking at the picture on the box.
Exactly. Then you have the concept-driven, or top-down model, which is often called the schema model. This argues the complete opposite. It says readers use their prior knowledge, their expectations, and their mental frameworks, their schemas, to predict what the text means. You are relying far less on the literal print and much more on your brain's predictive power.
I actually have a perfect way to prove this to you, the listener, right now. I want you to listen to this sentence, but imagine reading it with completely jumbled letters. Ready?
Let's hear it.
It doesn't inter in what order the listen read. The only ipperment tying is taught the first and elsat ultier be at the ruck picle.
Ah, yes. The famous hypoglycemia effect.
Yes. If reading was strictly bottom-up, that jumbled mess would just short-circuit your brain. You wouldn't be able to decode it at all. But because you are an experienced reader, your brain uses its top-down schema to predict the words based on the context and just the first and last letters. You barely even notice the misspellings.
Which is exactly why the most widely accepted modern view is the interactive model. Effective reading demands both of those things at once.
Mm-hmm.
You are rapidly decoding visual data from the bottom up while simultaneously projecting your background knowledge from the top down. They meet in the middle to create immediate comprehension.
That is just so incredibly complex. So we have this intense biological hardware doing saccades and fixations to decode literal symbols.
Right.
But literal symbols aren't enough to capture human experience, are they? If I am heartbroken or elated or terrified, literal data-driven words completely fail me. To truly express ourselves, we had to invent a software upgrade for our language. And that is the art of figurative speech.
Yeah, and to understand why figurative speech exists,
Yeah.
we really have to look at why we communicate in the first place. The linguist Gordon Wells broke human communication down into 5 core functions.
By functions. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
We communicate to control giving an order or a warning. We communicate to share feelings, to get factual information, and to ritualize, like saying hello or bless you when someone sneezes. But the deepest, most complex function he identifies is imagining and creating.
And that imagining function is the birthplace of figurative language. Like, in English, we use devices like synecdoche substituting a part for a whole. We say, the face that launched 1,000 ships, instead of just saying Helen of Troy was beautiful.
Right, it paints a much grander picture.
Exactly. But I am obsessed with the Filipino equivalents mentioned in our sources. The Tayute, they have poanjis, which is a metaphor, and senekdok. And then there's pagihimig, which is onomatopoeia, where the actual sound of the word mimics the thing it describes.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because figurative language really is the bridge between literal text and complex, ineffable human emotion. It gives us a mechanism to express the abstract by tying it to something deeply concrete.
Yes. It is exactly like a computer zip file.
Oh, a zip file.
Yeah. Figurative language compresses massive amounts of cultural context, history, and emotion into a tiny little phrase. If you look at idioms or salakain in Filipino, they are the ultimate cultural zip files.
Give me an example.
Okay, take the phrase alagang ahas. It literally translates to a pet snake. But culturally, it means a traitor, or someone who is profoundly ungrateful to someone who cared for them.
Right.
Or take the phrase nagdibilang ng post. It literally means counting posts, but it is used to describe someone who is jobless.
Wait, unpack that image for a second. Counting posts. Why does that mean unemployed?
Well, because it conjures this incredibly specific, visceral image of a person aimlessly wandering the streets, walking from business to business, looking for work with literally nothing else to do but stare at the utility poles passing by. It captures the exhaustion and the exact visual landscape of that society perfectly.
That's heartbreaking, honestly, and that is the crucial takeaway here. An idiom makes zero sense unless you share the cultural context of the society that forged it. Language is never created in a vacuum. It is a mirror reflecting the daily economic, political, and emotional struggles of a specific people.
So, if figurative language and literature are the ultimate reflections of a society, we should be able to look at the historical texts of different nations and see exactly what they valued, right?
Absolutely. If we apply this to the great literary masters of Asia, it is like reading the psychological profile of entire empires.
I love that.
Let's look at China. Their literature gives us a phenomenal window into their shifting philosophies. Like, in the 4th century BC, you have Chuang-Tzu. He is the preeminent Taoist philosopher.
Okay.
In his writings, he depicts himself as a quirky, detached figure who cared absolutely nothing for public approval, rigid structures, or material wealth. His writing flows like water. It reflects a society wrestling with the desire to let go of control and just align with the natural flow of the universe, the Tao.
But then you look at a completely different era and find Sima Qian, the grand historian. He couldn't be more different from Chuang-Tzu.
Oh, totally different.
He literally etched 3,000 years of Chinese history onto heavy bamboo tablets, over 500,000 characters. If we go back to Gordon Wells, Sima Qian is the ultimate embodiment of the getting factual information function. He was anchoring an empire in permanence.
Yeah, and you see that exact same philosophical friction later on during the Tang Dynasty. You have the poet Tu Fu, who was a strict Confucian moralist. He was a realist.
Right.
His poetry meticulously documented the harsh realities of his time famines, the disasters of war, the deterioration of the state. He used literature as a tool for moral accountability.
And his contemporary was Li Po. And Li Po is my absolute favorite. He was a Taoist romantic, just a total wild card.
He really was.
He loved wine, he loved nature, and he had almost no regard for the permanence of his own work. He would write these brilliant, ecstatic masterpieces, fold them into little paper boats, and just float them down the stream.
Which is just wild for a writer to do. But it perfectly illustrates the dichotomy of human communication. Tu Fu uses language to bind society together through duty and facts. Li Po uses language to transcend reality, accessing that imagination function. He cared about the act of creating, not the preservation of the text.
So if China used literature to navigate this tension between rigid history and flowing nature, Japan took a completely different route. Early Japan borrowed heavily from Chinese culture, sure, but eventually they turned inward, especially during the Heian Age.
Right, the Han Age, that was a prolonged period of peace in Japan. And with peace comes the luxury and, honestly, the burden of extreme aesthetic refinement.
Yeah.
The imperial court had very few actual administrative duties, so they poured all their psychological energy into art, manners, and literature. This is the claustrophobic, highly polished world that birthed the Pillow Book by Seishin Argon.
Which is essentially her private diary. That it captures the agonizingly nuanced etiquette of court life. She has this famous list in it called Hateful Things.
Yes, I love this list.
It's so good. One of the items is a visitor who comes over, is clearly in a hurry to leave, but just keeps chattering away at the door.
We've all been there.
Right. And because of the strict rules of court politeness, you cannot tell them to leave. You just have to stand there and suffer. 1,000 years later, that is still the most universally relatable feeling.
It really is. But that shared suffering over etiquette speaks to deeply ingrained societal codes that shaped everything in Japan, including their poetry. You have the concept of giri, which connotes duty, honor, and saving face, and on, which is a profound, almost unpayable sense of obligation or indebtedness to others.
And you can see those rigid social codes physically manifested in their poetry. The forms are so strictly regimented. You have the tanka, which is a 31-syllable poem, rigidly structured as 5-7-5-7-7.
Exactly.
And then from that evolved the haiku, which cuts it down even further to just 5-7-5 syllables, and almost always requires a kigo, a specific word denoting the season.
And those structural constraints are not accidents. A haiku is the literary equivalent of giri and on. It demands intense discipline. You must respect the historical boundary of the 17 syllables. You must fulfill your obligation to the form. But within that tiny, constrained space, you are expected to capture the infinite beauty of nature.
That idea, that constraint shapes creativity, brings us to the final leg of our journey today. Just as China and Japan forged their voices through philosophy and court etiquette, the Philippines went through a dramatic literary evolution forged in the fires of colonization and revolution. It is a history of language adapting to survive.
Yeah, it's a powerful history. In the pre-colonial era, Philippine literature was vast and entirely oral.
Yeah.
Epics like Biag ni Lamang were passed down through memory and recitation.
Yeah.
But the landscape violently shifted when the Spanish arrived, bringing the 3 Gs, God, Gold, and Glory.
And they brought the printing press. In 1593, they print the Doctrina Christiana, which is heavily religious. For a long time, the literature is dominated by Catholic texts like the Passion, which was chanted during Lent. But what is so brilliant is how the Filipinos didn't just passively absorb this.
No, they didn't.
They localized it. They took these foreign religious European forms and evolved them into secular, uniquely Filipino romances called the Awit and the Corrido. Francisco Balagtas wrote Florante at Laura, which is a towering masterpiece that used a European metrical romance structure to subtly critique the Spanish colonization.
The ability to subvert the dominant paradigm using its own tools is just incredible. And then the era shifts again with the arrival of the Americans. They introduced a massive public education system which totally democratized access to reading and writing. This ignited a golden age of the Tagalog novel, with writers like Lope K. Santa.
And it birthed the Balagtasan. If you don't know what this is, imagine an early 20th century rap battle, but done entirely in elegant, rhyming poetry. It was a live, performative debate. The first one in 1924 was won by José Corazón de Jesus under the pen name Huseng Batute.
What a legacy.
Right. It proves that even as literature became formalized and printed, the Filipino desire for language to be a communal social performance never died.
But maybe the most stunning paradox in this evolution happened during the Japanese occupation in the 1940s.
Oh, yes. This part is fascinating. The Japanese arrived and strictly banned the use of English, which had become the dominant literary language under the Americans. They imposed massive censorship,
Right.
but ironically, by banning English, they accidentally caused a massive renaissance for native Tagalog literature.
Because writers couldn't use English, they naturally returned to their roots. The Tagalog short story flourished, and there was a profound revival of ancient native poetic forms,
Yeah.
specifically the Tanaga.
That's Naga.
Yeah. The Tanaga consists of 4 lines with exactly 7 syllables per line, 7777. It's incredibly tight.
Which brings us right back to the haiku. We see the strict 575 of the Japanese court and the strict 7-syllable rule of the Tanaga rising under occupation. It forces me to ask, is strict constraint, whether it's cultural duty or oppressive censorship, actually the greatest catalyst for human creativity?
Well, history screams yes. Whether a writer is restricted by the syllables of a tanka or the threat of an occupying army, the human drive to communicate, that imagining function Will's talked about, it just refuses to be silenced.
Wow.
When you compress a gas, it gets hotter and more volatile. When you compress language through constraint, it becomes sharper, deeper, and infinitely more potent. It finds a way to encode massive rebellion into just 7 syllables.
Okay, let's take a breath. Look at the immense arc we just traveled. We started with the invisible firing of neurons in a bilingual toddler's brain.
Yeah, we really covered some ground.
We zoomed in on the jerky physical saccades of your eyes darting across a screen, and we watched how that basic biology scaled up into cultural zip files, into Taoist philosophers sailing poems down rivers, and into the defiant revolutionary verses of the Philippines.
It is a profound reminder that reading and speaking are never passive. They are active, physical, cognitive, and deeply cultural acts of survival. Every word you read is part of an unbroken chain of meaning-making.
So the next time you are quickly skimming a text message on your phone, or maybe you comfort a friend using an old idiom, I want you to pause. Just take 1 second to appreciate the bizarre biological mechanics, the cognitive schemas, and the thousands of years of historical friction that makes that one simple act of communication possible.
You are operating the most complex machinery evolution ever produced.
Which leaves me with one final thought for you to ponder. We have seen how environments dictate the art. Bamboo scrolls shaped Chinese history, court etiquette birthed the haiku, censorship revived the Tanaga. Today, you and I live in a hyper-connected digital era. Our environment is defined by rapid scrolling, algorithmic constraints, character limits, and endless skimming. So if the physical constraint always dictates the masterpiece, what kind of entirely new language and what kind of unimaginable literature is our current digital era secretly forging for the historians of tomorrow?